So the research is done and the stats are in. 100% of us are going to die. To this point in history, there has not been an exception to that rule, and yet death remains one of our greatest taboo subjects. This conversation aims to explore these questions that we never really ask. I'm Ali Hill and welcome to Standout Life, a podcast dedicated to exploring what does it take to live boldly amongst the mess and busyness of our world. It turns out that talking about death won't kill you, and it's a conversation that our guest today is keen for more of us to have more often. Dr Hannah Gould is a cultural anthropologist specialising in contemporary death and religion. Alongside academic research, she creates public programs to advocate for more equitable systems of death care for all. She's been a presenter with Australian Catalyst, part of the SBS series Ray Martin, The Last Goodbye, and she's a regular appearing on The Conversation and ABC News. One of the things that I quickly realised about this conversation with Hannah was that any discussion about death is actually a conversation about life in disguise. This chat dances between the deep and the practical. Hannah shares her personal experience of the loss of her father and also shares with us things that we can ask when dealing with funeral directors. Hannah also highlights the burden of the eldest daughter syndrome and ways that we can share that load. I got so much out of this conversation that I know you will as well. So let's dive into the topics that we don't always face with the thought-provoking Dr Hannah Gould. Hey, real quick, before we dive into today's conversation, if you're a leader or a manager, then I want to tell you about pragmatic thinking. We help people like you doing the hard work of building better cultures, stronger teams, and more confident leaders. How do we do it? Well, we do it using the latest in psychology and behavioural science, combining with nearly 3 decades of experience. So visit pragmaticthinking.com or find the link in the show notes below to find out more. Now, on to today's chat. Hannah, welcome. It is such a delight to chat with you today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's so lovely to be here.
We're going to dive into some really important topics, great conversations that I think if we had more often, it would help us to navigate the inevitable in our life.
Yeah, and I think also hopefully would help you live better day to day. I'm kind of convinced that this is not just a topic for the end of our lives or the once in a lifetime when it happens.
I'm going to put a pin into that because I think there's something about talking about death that teaches us about life. My first question to you is, what gets in the way of us talking about death?
Oh, so many things. In some ways, it's very logical. I mean, it makes sense that we are uncomfortable or afraid of death. We have never experienced it, right? We don't know anyone who's died and can come back and tell us all about it. And so it is, to some extent, always the unknown. And so it makes logical sense, therefore, that we would, have some sort of hesitancy towards it. I think in many ways also, ironically, it is actually love that gets in the way of us talking about death. Like we're privileged enough and lucky enough to have people around us who we love deeply. And that could be, your family members or your friends or your dog. Then the kind of contemplating the idea of their non-existence is so heartbreaking that we don't want to come close to it. And it's a totally normal reaction as a human that, when you put your hand on the stove and it feels hot and it burns you, you withdraw your hand. And in the same way, when we come close to this thing that is the kind of the grief of losing somebody that we love, we would tend to withdraw our hand. We tend to withdraw ourselves emotionally. So I have a lot of kind of sympathy, I suppose, and a lot of understanding for the fact that we don't like to talk about death, even though I think that it's probably something we should do more often, both for practical reasons, but also because I think it probably will help us experience death and grief, but also will help us experience life day to day.
Talk to me about your pathway to this research. Why research death?
Yeah, it's kind of an odd career choice, I suppose. I started out as my training was in cultural anthropology. And anthropologists are really interested in human universals, so those things that bring us together, the things that we all do, whether that be, work or sex or eating or, whatever it is, religion. And death is certainly something that we all do. So far, everyone's done it. And we're also really interested in cultural particularities, so how we do things differently. And what always struck me as fascinating was that death is this thing that we all do, but we do it in very different ways. We do it in very different ways throughout time and also across, different cultures. Nobody dies the same, and even the way that we die in Australia today is quite different from how our parents or grandparents died. So I always have this kind of intellectual curiosity about it, but as with many things, it doesn't really motivate you to study them until it affects you. And I was in my honours year, so my final year of my undergraduate, when my dad, very quickly within the course of that year, was diagnosed with cancer, had surgery, was in a coma, got treatment, and eventually ended up dying, which was, I think, surprisingly enough, we're recording today on the 26th, so it was the 12th anniversary of his death yesterday, on the 25th. Yeah, and, I think I was 22 at the time, and I thought I was really mature and totally capable. I was totally, that was a perfectly reasonable age for your dad to die. But in retrospect, it really wasn't. And I was so young and had so much of my life that I would have liked him to be here for. That, the classic academic thing is like, oh, okay, well, I don't understand something. I might as well get a PhD in it. I am I just kind of started studying death, and that took me to lots of different places around the world, but it's always been this kind of, I think, both professional and personal kind of commitment to trying to understand kind of what I see as the question. Like, there's almost like no other question worth studying in some ways. Like, all questions lead to our mortality, and this is our mortality, and why would I not devote my life?
It's, to honour your dad 12 years ago and that experience, as you say, 22 is so young. You think you're equipped.
I don't know what I was thinking.
And
you
face that with what you've got at the time, right?
Yeah, well, it was the oldest I'd ever been. And I know that sounds weird, but you just kind of think, well, what do you mean I have to be older? This is who I am up until now. Like, this is all I've got. And I think also because my dad was very much my person. Like, I think everyone has a person in their family or someone who they think that understands their brainwave uniquely. And my dad was very much that for me. He was the person that really, I felt, clicked with me and who I was. And so it was just incredibly difficult for me to understand or contemplate like what it would be. I didn't quite know how to live in a world where he was not and I still was. And I'm not sure that I still do, except that you just keep living, right? Like,
I don't think time gives you the answer on that.
No.
And with those people, when they're your people and you're going through something so significant, you want to share it with them. They're the people that would help you through that.
Oh my God, it's so funny. I mean, it's so ironic and cosmic that you're like, God, who I really need right now is my dad to talk to about my dad dying. And he's not, because he's bloody gone. And so that, and I don't think you kind of ever also, we know all these things about grief. We know that, like, the idea that grief is temporary or that it ends or that it resolves or there's closure. Like, we know this is all bullshit. So you don't ever really learn to kind of finish that. You just kind of learn to walk. I don't know. I just kind of say sometimes you just learn to walk with a pebble in your shoe. Like, you just kind of learn to live around that absence as opposed to kind of fixing it or filling it in some way.
Yeah, there's a lot we can talk about grief and how, I don't know, there's expectations somehow, and a lot of it unsaid. I don't know where it's come from. But
so much bullshit about grief and, like, what it's supposed to look like and how you're supposed to be and how you're supposed to act and how long it's supposed to last and, how dare you be happy or how dare you find humor in the situation, or how dare you be sad 12 years later, right? And all of those cultural expectations are so normative and so kind of prescriptive, which is quite, it's so frustrating, but it's quite funny because we're so bad at descriptively understanding grief that all we can kind of do is throw these kind of you musts at it. You should. It should look this way.
Yeah, and in some ways it feels like another way of not talking about death, right? Like you were saying before, of going, it's too painful, it's too hard, the love is too big. So in the way that we talk about grief is, let's, if we can put a ribbon on it, if we can have it done, then that would be great. I'm curious, with that experience, no doubt you've reflected on any of the stories or messages that you grew up with in your childhood about death, about grief. How have they changed over time for you?
It's quite interesting. I mean, my family history is quite, like, it really is in some ways a story of kind of radical shifts in people's thinking. Both of my sets of grandparents were Salvation Army officers, so quite British, reserved, English, like conservative, Christian on both sides of my family. And then my parents kind of went off to university in the 70s and were hippies and, throughout Christianity and kind of did yoga and Buddhism. And, I don't know if I've got a photo somewhere, but my dad got married in a green velvet suit. And I know, iconic. And my mum like made her own wedding dress from like this beautiful lace. And so even like there's already like kind of a radical shift about how one might approach big questions like the afterlife or religion or grief, or like how you're supposed to be emotionally in the world. And I think there's also kind of a strain of neurodivergence that cuts into that kind of also complicates, I suppose, or transforms kind of like public expression of emotion. But I mean, I remember, it's so funny in retrospect because I don't think up until my dad dying I thought, I had a lot of experience with death. But a lot of people died when I was younger. My grandfather on my mum's side, he had multiple sclerosis for the entire time that I knew him. And he was bedbound for my entire childhood, and he died when I must have been, I think certainly in primary school, 6 or 7 or something. And I remember my mum kind of fighting or insisting that I went to the funeral. And she thought it was really important that I was there, and that, she was there as a daughter and was, quite expressive in, I suppose, her grief. But that was not necessarily seen as like the right thing to do or the good thing to do. And then I had a number of friends who then died in high school, quite, before their time, quote unquote. And so I think, have these early experiences of death in my life, perhaps more so than most people have. Certainly privileged to not have a lot of tragedy in my early life, but I think grandparents dying and young friends dying when you're still in school does shape your kind of understanding of death and its place in your life. Yeah.
Yeah, I think for all of us, though, considering those conversations or social expectations around where they've come from in our own childhood is really interesting. As you've studied death, one of the things that we can hope for if we start to go, okay, if I need to contemplate my own death, I want a good one.
Yes.
What is a good death? What does that mean?
Well, I mean, a good death is a myth. It's a lie. It doesn't exist. And, I think that's probably the most important thing I try to get to in this book when it comes to death, when it comes to grief, all of these things, is that like this image of an ideal way of dying or an ideal way of grieving can often be much more of a burden than it is a help to us, right? Because we do all have this very particular image, I think. Most people, if you think about a good death, what a good death looks to you, it's probably, you're 90, you're surrounded by friends and family, you're at home, you die in your sleep after your life's great work.
Yeah.
And it's pain-free, there's no suffering, you have all of your cognitive, like, you're sharp as a tack until the very end, and then good night, that's it. That's a good death. But not only is that kind of image so unattainable for most of us, and it's like so not how most people's deaths go in Australia but around the world, but it's also very particular. Like, that's not a universal image of what a good death is, and it's not even a timeless image. So that notion of a good death has very much changed throughout even Western, cultural traditions and history. And I think what seems to be emerging for us in the 21st century is this like real emphasis on control and autonomy and deciding like when you die and where you die, like choreographing the final moments. And they're all very good things if you're able to achieve them, but in some ways that I really worry that it just sets us up to fail. And you don't want to fail death. I mean, you can't fail death. You can't fail death.
You can't do it wrong. You don't get to come back and do it tomorrow.
It's hard enough to do it without also then have to be like, was that good enough, right? Was the dying good enough? Was the funeral good enough? Was the grief good enough? So I would hope that we're a bit more critical about this image of a good death and we leave some more room for improvisation or just like messiness. Like, death is messy. Life is messy. It's not going to be perfect. And that's okay.
And to sit in the uncertainty of it. We don't get given a date and a time, or you don't know what that's going to be. So you just face the next step.
It's funny talking about, parents and inheritances and family cultures, because my mum put me into yoga since I was like 6 years old. Like, this has just been a lifelong practice for me. And I kind of dropped out of it when I was too cool as a teenager, because as you do. And I've come back to it now because I've seen the light, as you do in your 30s and 20s and 30s, when you realise your mum was right all along, unfortunately. But I suppose I didn't really gel with the practice until I kind of heard it explained as this like practice of discomfort, or like that it was a learning to sit, particularly something like yin, like learning to sit in discomfort and being okay with uncertainty and being okay with uncomfortable emotions and sensations in the body. And I think like, because we don't talk about death at all, because we're always pulling our hand away from it, we don't get the opportunity to practice. Like, we don't get the opportunity to practice the discomfort of death. And so therefore when it does hit, we're totally at sea, where like we have no framework.
It feels so uncomfortable, and we haven't had that tolerance of it. Yeah, that's a great way to kind of think about it.
It's a muscle. Like, you need to build up a little bit of a death literacy muscle or a contemplating death muscle. And that's not going to fix it. Like, I don't want to say, and therefore you'll have a great death, and therefore your grief will be easy. No, it'll be bad. It's always going to be bad. But I think it maybe can be like a little bit better.
You use this term, and I think it's a great term, talking about death denial. And in some ways where we see the skyrocketing of wellbeing conversations, longevity is really at the forefront of what we want to talk about. So again, it's like we can have the cheat code to maybe I'll be the one that doesn't die.
Yeah. I don't believe I'll be the one that don't do it. Like, despite every single human who's ever lived dying, maybe I'll be the one that cheats.
The one.
No, you won't.
Yeah. Find the secret. So that can coat over this. Well, let's talk about longevity and health, and you have to do better and do more. And as you say, almost kind of a control in that kind of sense, to start to open up the conversation, sit with the discomfort of that conversation. How do we do that? And is there a middle ground where we then don't get so obsessed about our death, dying, this might be the end? My kids laugh at me, right? Because there are times where, like, I've got to take this photo because this is your last day of your first day of school, right?
This is exactly the type of thing when you're a kid, you're like, oh my God, Mum. And then when you're like 20 or 30, you're like, oh, Mum, you're smart. Like,
thanks for the photos.
Yeah, I think it definitely is like either extreme, I think, is potentially harmful. So there certainly is kind of a pathological condition of death anxiety, and there are people whom, for whom death is, thinking about death and contemplating death is an extraordinary burden in their lives. And We're very lucky in Australia that there's a lot of research going on. There's a death anxiety centre in Sydney, and then there is the capacity for people to seek out diagnosis and treatment if you're worrying about it. And I certainly think that, like, you know, if you thought about death every moment of every day, you get nothing done.
Yeah.
Like, what's the point of planning for anything if you think you're going to die at every moment? So that's certainly not what I'm advocating for. I think there is a healthier middle ground in which we just find ways of bringing what I call some, like, gentle death awareness into our everyday lives. And for me, at least, that has been an extraordinary, like, life-affirming practice.
In what way?
Well, just like it sounds really, like, kind of, but, like, you just don't sweat the small stuff. Like, I kind of frequently say to people, don't worry, we're all going to die. Like,
Yeah.
you know, you're less afraid to make mistakes and to be embarrassed about yourself. And because I'm less afraid to make mistakes and to be less embarrassed about myself or to be too concerned with things, I think that also gives me more compassion to other people. Like, to realise that, oh my gosh, like, this person is also just, like, living their one life for the first time, and they're going to make mistakes. And they're going to be embarrassed about themselves. And at the end of the day, we're all going to die. And that's, like, so there's this story that I'm reminded of, which is when my dad was in hospice. My dad died in Caritas Christi, which is a hospice run by St. Vincent's here in Melbourne. It's a gorgeous place, actually. And I remember I was coming from work to come and see him, and I just bought a bunch of sunflowers because, like, what do you do?
Yeah.
You have to do something. And, like, what do you do? Like, I'm going to buy the flowers, you know, I'm going to make the cookies, who knows? And I remember I was getting on the bus to go visit him, and this lovely elderly couple, you know, said, oh, you know, what are you doing? And, oh, are these, you know, who are these for? Are they for a friend or something? And I kind of looked at them and I went, oh, God.
Do you want to know?
Like, do you really ask this question? I was like, okay, well, so they're for my dad, and he's in hospice and he's dying. And, you know, this woman was just like, oh, so there's no chance of him getting better? Is he not going to improve? Or I was like, no, he's in hospice. He's dying. But I always just remember now that, like, I mean, I was just a girl on a bus carrying a bunch of sunflowers, and no one around me necessarily knew that I was dealing with my dad being in hospice or dying.
Yeah.
And so I think now, because I have that awareness that was going in my life, sometimes now when I see someone who frustrates me or I have no idea, I think, I don't know, maybe their dad's in hospice. Right? Maybe those sunflowers aren't for a lover or a friend maybe they're dying sunflowers. Like, you know, and it gives me kind of a bit more appreciation of other people as well as an appreciation of my own life. Like, I do really think that if you think about this being your one wild and wonderful life that you have, it forces you in a way, or prompts you in a way, to, like, make choices in your life that better reflect who you want to be and how you want to spend it.
There's a perspective and kindness for ourselves and for others that comes into
and I kind of
that.
always appreciated the way that it could affect your life, but it only really hit me that it really also affects how I deal with other people. Like, how I kind of deal with my students, you know, when they ask me for an extension or they email me and go, yeah, I mean, we're all going to die. It's fine. Like, this is not the most important thing you'll do. And then therefore the things that are the most important thing you do, you kind of go, oh no, shit, I really need to turn up for that. I need to be there for that. And so it's not so much that you contemplate death all the time. It's just that I try and talk about in the book that you live your life in the light of mortality. Like, you live it with the understanding that mortality is part of the human condition. And hopefully that prompts you to make better choices.
Changes how we turn up day to day.
Honestly, it's like, I don't think I fully contemplated my dad dying really until I wrote this book 10 years later. I don't think I really started making good choices or living that way until 10 years later. But again, it's my first time living. That's okay.
And it's going to be messy and it's going to be hard, and there'll be times we forget those perspectives and we just get frustrated with people, but it gives us a ground zero to come back to.
Indeed.
In your research, you talk about how both gender and generations face this conversation differently. What are the roles? What roles do women play when it comes to death care? What have you noticed? What do you see?
Women bring people into the world, and women usher people out of the world. Yeah, both in terms of the kind of professional death care sector and the kind of at-home labour. Women, particularly, eldest daughters, are the ones that are doing this care work. So they're caring for elderly parents, they're navigating aged care homes, they're navigating doctor's appointments, they're speaking at funerals, they're, organising all of that care for their older generation. And a lot of the time, what ends up happening is that they're also caring for their kids. So we have this kind of odd term, which is the sandwich generation. But there is a sense in which women have this dual role in having to care for both above and below them in terms of generations. And frankly, if we didn't have women performing that role, Australia would cease to function. The kind of unpaid labour that women perform within the household is so extraordinary that if they were actually paid for it, it would be billions of dollars in the Australian economy. And I don't like to correlate it with economic measures, but sometimes it's the only way to explain it to policymakers and governments that this is really important. And it's also a significant burden on women much of the time, because it affects, therefore, how their bereavement, how their grief is experienced, and it affects their career progression. Today we only have 2 days of bereavement leave as a standard in Australia, which is, it's insane. I mean,
crazy.
It's crazy. How that doesn't, and you have to, if you want to have any longer than 2 days of bereavement leave, you have to kind of start eating into your unpaid leave and carers leave and all those other things as well. And it's a situation that's likely to only kind of get worse in some ways, because, well, not worse, but intensify, because we're moving towards this era in Australia called peak death, which is when more people are going to die than ever before, largely as a result of the fact that the baby boomers, our most populous generation in Australia, are now older Australians. So the youngest baby boomer is just past 65.
Right.
And so 65 is what the Australian government calls an older Australian. And so we know that there's going to be a lot more people dying in Australia. That means there's going to be a lot more people needing to care for them. And there are just significant gaps. It's kind of the fact that we don't want to contemplate death, I think, is philosophical, and it's emotional and it's spiritual, but also it just creates really bad infrastructure problems.
It's practical. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really practical. The fact that politicians don't want to talk, the fact that palliative care and aged care is not a sexy topic, or it doesn't win a lot of votes, means that we just have these big gaps emerging in both our healthcare and our death care sector that concern me, that kind of make me question, well, how, not just for the welfare of the carers, the women who'll be looking after the elderly parents, but for the parents themselves, how will older Australians face their death, and what kinds of death will they get to have? And of course, if you've got money, that's fine. You'll probably have a
there's
relatively
more
good
options,
death,
there's more choices. Yeah.
There's more choices, there's more options. But for many people who don't have money, it's a much more difficult path towards the end of life.
I have a lot of female listeners to this podcast, and they will no doubt be nodding as you talk about the pressure on women.
Eldest daughters.
Eldest daughters in particular, where there is a desire to want to be there to support, to step into that, but also those who feel the enormous pressure of it, and maybe the impact on, as you say, career. They're also caring for kids, the impact on family. Now I do have, whether it's 2 days, I've got a week, I'm giving myself a week, and now I have to get back into it because I've got to go to dance classes, and I've got to go to Christmas shows and all the rest. What advice do we give? How do we contemplate this? Lying in bed is okay for an extra week, or however long you need.
Oh my God, that is totally okay for an extra week. This is the other thing, which is to say that as much as I'm frustrated at the fact that it affects women's careers, and I'm frustrated, I can assure you that when you die on your deathbed, you're not going to be thinking about oh no, I took that extra week
No.
to mourn my parents, right? So I don't want to, I think I get frustrated sometimes as someone who's childless, and kind of this idea that the family is always more important than your career, because I think your career can be equally important and meaningful to who you are. So I don't want to be like, oh, always put off your career for caring for your parents or caring for loved ones. But at the same time, remember that you're operating in a system that is not designed with your best interests at heart. And bereavement leave is terrible, and you don't have to feel guilty about making the choices that you make in order to mourn how you need to mourn and grieve how you need to grieve. And in terms of what you can do to kind of prepare for that, I think it is about having these conversations really early and honestly, and also to start recruiting allies early and honestly. So, if you are an eldest daughter, if you're a sibling, get the other siblings on board pretty quickly and make it clear that you're not going to be the household manager when it comes to these kind of responsibilities, right? That this is a group effort. This is and that also means getting on board your parents and having a conversation with them about death. I know that's really scary and very difficult sometimes, but there are ways to approach conversations about the end in life and aging and death with your parents that are kind of easier than others. So some general tips would be, I think no one likes to talk about aging and death, right? Because no one likes to talk about their own vulnerability, which at the end of the day, this is what this conversation is. But everyone has something they really care about. And it could be the music at the funeral. It could be the food. It could be it could be something quite personal, like I really want to be able to feed myself and wash myself at the end. And if I can't do that, then that's where my quality of life ends, kind of thing.
Yep.
And I think if nothing else, everyone really, really cares about who's going to be looking after their dog or cat. So always go, that's a great in for a conversation. I just want to make sure
who are you
that
choosing?
your beloved fur baby will be looked after. This is what I'm concerned about. And then most people will engage in that conversation, because as someone who has a dog, that is the thing that I care about. So I think there's find an easy way into that conversation, or find something that people care about to ground that conversation is one. And then to give another tip, or another kind of, I suppose, bit of advice for this kind of conversation. So get your allies, find a way into the conversation. And then thirdly, it's unfortunately, you kind of have to lead by example. So even if you're, in your 30s or 40s or 50s, do your own end of life care plan. Make sure you have your will, and then engage your parents in that conversation by saying, hey guys, I've just done my will, and here's what I want to happen should something happen to me, and here's my end of life care plans, and I want to make you aware of it. Because if nothing else, you can't, you have to walk the walk if you want to talk the talk. You have to confront that in yourself if you want to get your parents to do that. And also it's important for you to have. This image of the good death that we're all going to die at 65 or 70 or 80 or 90 is unfortunately not the reality. A lot of us will. We're very lucky in Australia. We have great access to a lot of technology and medical interventions, but it's also just really important that you have your affairs taken care of, and that can open a conversation with your parents.
And taking the time to sit in those questions and to contemplate that for yourself is really powerful. I supported my dad through palliative care, and I remember sitting down with the aged care directive, which again, it's a form you can get online. His GP had recommended it, but it actually opened up all of this conversation about music, about his kind of final wishes, but also what his experience was like losing his grandparents, his parents. We just kind of allowed the conversation to go. And when he did pass away, that feeling of being able to fulfill his wishes just in a song was so powerful.
Yeah.
So to actually consider that for yourself is I'm not being pushy, but you're actually giving the gift to the people around you to kind of go, this is how I would like things to go. If they do or they don't, whatever, but
Yeah,
you're at least
and I
putting those forward.
think you kind of have to offer up your own vulnerability when you're asking someone else to be vulnerable about that. Right. So there are some extraordinary tools online, and there are official forms online, and, advanced care directives and all of those things, but it doesn't have to necessarily be that formal or complicated. Like, it can be a Post-it note.
Yep.
It can be just like, I don't know, a conversation over a cup of tea about, because it's, as much as that is a conversation about end of life and death, it's actually often a conversation about life and what is important to people, what they love and what they care about. So it's like, yes, it is about death and dying, but now that I've gone through this experience, I obviously kind of my mum now has this conversation with me all the time. And she recently had a minor heart surgery, and she's totally fine, back to running and dancing and everything else. But, I remember she sent me an email that just kind of like outlined, I would say that I made her. She would say that she sent it unprompted. I've discovered that this is a point of contention between the two.
Let her have it. Let her have it.
Whatever she says, she can have it. She sent me a lovely email, my brother a lovely email, that was just like, these are the things that are important to me, right? That I can do this, that I can do this, that I can do this. This is the kind of funeral I'd like to have. This is where I'd like my money to go. These are the things. And as much as it was about death, it was about life. It was about the causes that she cared about, the food, the drink, the music. And so in some ways, I think it was quite life-affirming. And then, you put it somewhere. You don't have to talk about it every day. I think people can become too death positive. I don't know. I think people can focus on it too much. And like, as much as I'm a death and dying scholar, I'm like, I don't want to talk about this right now. Let's, it's not
go and have breakfast.
Yeah, it's breakfast.
Yeah.
Indeed.
If someone does get pushback from their loved one, can I go, I don't want to talk about it. Why are you bringing this up? You're making it too negative. What might be the next step?
I don't think you can force somebody to have this conversation. If they really don't want to talk about it, then they really don't want to talk about it. And my dad really didn't want to talk about it. He died quite young, and we didn't have a lot of time to prepare between his terminal diagnosis, like stopping of treatment for the cancer and him dying. I think it was 3 months or something. And I think he spent most of that time trying to convince us that I should take him to Paris. He was like, can you just get time off work? Can we just jump on a plane? And he was in a hospice, actively dying at this moment. But in a weird way, that actually, what he did care about gave us some inclination of what he would want for his funeral, which is French cheese and French red wine. Le Mer, this song at the end of,
It's giving me an idea, Hannah. I can tell you that.
Even if they're not talking about death, sometimes they are talking about life, which is at the end of the day what's important. So you can't force the conversation. There are different, as I said, kind of tricks that you can get, strategies that you can get to use, find out what is really important to them. Often, as I said, it's their pets. The other thing you can do is bring up another case, another example of friends or family or in the media of something that didn't go right? And say, look, I just don't, this happened to my friend and her dad had this really terrible experience. I just don't want this to happen to you, right? And sometimes that kind of comparative element can be helpful. But at the end of the day, whether or not someone you're caring for wants to talk about death, you can still prepare yourself and your resources and your community for that moment, even if the dying person doesn't want to. Because it's their death, right? And they can face it however they want. This idea that we all have to kind of be fully death accepting and zen and enlightened as we die also is just another ideological model of a good death. It's just another normative model, right? If you want to rage against the dying of the night, go for it, right?
Go down swinging.
If you want to go down swinging, bloody go down swinging. I don't think that it's very dangerous. I think one of the things I've noticed about this kind of death positivity movement, or this movement to talk more about death, is it's very dangerous to replace one model of a good death with another, right? So it's dangerous to kind of critique this kind of death denying Western biomedical model and replace it with another model, which, yes, it's more death affirming and it's accepting. We're all going to have a conversation and we're all going to do yoga and we're all going to, but it's just another model, right? And neither is correct. Both of them are constructions of how we should die. And so if people can die how they want to die, right? I don't think there's a right way to die and approach that. But no matter how your person chooses or moves towards the end of the life, you can still do things to help you and prepare you. And that's just not a one-person thing in yourself. That's also gathering resources and gathering community, which I think is really important.
Finding ways to ask for help, finding ways to reach out, tune into what you need into that moment. On a practical level, yeah.
It's always about the girlfriends for me.
Yeah.
It's like, get your girlfriends and get your village, be a villager. That's what's important. Yeah.
And invest in them day to day, because they'll be the ones that you
They're the ones that
reach out to.
saved me. When my dad died, it was my girlfriends. Like, I would not have made it through without them. I don't know, women, like, they will save you every single time.
Yeah, they show up. They're extraordinary. I adore them. They should be more of them around. Hold on to yours. In a really practical sense, often when we think about death and dying and grief, it'll be that kind of moment of death or thinking about when someone's not around afterwards. And we quickly get through the burial and funeral component. Some of that might be laid out in a will. Often we think the choice is either you're being buried or cremated. They're the only options. There is a lot more that we can research and understand, again, in a really practical nature around environmentally friendly methods. But also, I love your nod towards greater creativity when it comes to funerals.
I want weirder funerals.
Yeah. Talk to me a little bit about what you found in your research, maybe what surprised you, what gives you that kind of heart to go, hey, you've got permission to
do whatever you want.
Do whatever you want.
So, first of all, one of the weird things is that everyone needs to be aware that funeral instructions and burial instructions, whether that's burial or cremation or something else, are not typically included in a will, and they're not enforceable in any way. They have no legal weight in Australia. So if you write down, I really would like to be buried, your next of kin, that's not a legally enforceable decision. And at the end of the day, it is your next of kin who will be making that decision. So that's just like important to know, because if you think that your legal next of kin doesn't know your wishes, now's the time to tell them. But also that, like, they are the person who's going to have to make all these decisions. So maybe it's a good thing to try and help them out with that and give them some ideas. And then in regards to funerals, I think like contemporary Australian funerals have such scope to be whatever you want them to be, right? We've seen this kind of trend in Australia towards secularization or a kind of de-churching. It doesn't mean they're not spiritual or have spiritual religious elements or ritual elements, but they're typically less likely to be held at a church now. And also we've seen a trend to kind of people having the bodily remains cremated and then perhaps having a ceremony afterwards. And if you don't have a coffin, or if you do have a coffin, or you have ashes, you can kind of do anything you want for that funeral ceremony. And what seems to be the most important value in contemporary Australian funerals is that whatever you want, that funeral ceremony reflects the spirit of the dead, right? It reflects who they were, their personality, their likes, their dislikes, their character. And that kind of allows you to do all kinds of things. Like, I've heard of funerals that were held at a cinema, right? The two people who died were massive, like, film buffs. And so they rented out a cinema and they had, like, popcorn for everyone. And they had a little ceremony at the front, and then they all watched these films that, it's kind of great. And, and then you have a lot of funeral rituals that are held at a beach, right? Or at a pub. There's a funeral company here in Melbourne that does these kind of it's called Last Hurrah Funerals, and they do these kind of unique funerals, original funerals for unique people. And, they've done a funeral that was held at the Tote, a live music venue here, and they had the coffin in a mosh pit. And they had they had this like heavy metal band on stage, and all of the friends and family were moshing around the coffin because that's what the person would have wanted. And similarly, I've seen a coffin that was carried through the goalposts on a footy pitch so that the dead could kick their final goal, right? Because they were a big Aussie footy fan. And it's I think what often happens, one of the problems, or one of those kind of great sadnesses I find about people being uncomfortable with death or having not a lot of information about death, is that stops them from doing what they want or what could be possible, right? Because we don't have a lot of information. We kind of tend to think that it's something you have to do, right? Like, it must go this way. And it's important that when you talk to a celebrant or a funeral director, that you realise that there's no particular way that you have to do this, right? There's no prescribed formula. And I can tell you from the research as well, there's no kind of correlation that we have, like, evidenced about the relationship between the funeral and grief. Like, it's not that if you don't have to have a big funeral for better grief, you don't even have to have a satisfying funeral for better grief. Like, grief is going to happen in whatever form it happens, and the funeral ritual can't fix it, and it can't solve it, and it can't make it better. So you can do whatever you want. And I think you should do whatever you want. Like, I think you should do something really weird. Because why not? Because, I mean, and there's no rules, really no rules about what the funeral should look like.
That permission to creativity, again, is another important conversation earlier, because in that moment it can feel like time's really tight. There's just logistic things that have to happen while you're also in the middle of that emotional heartbreak of grief that the creativity can hit afterwards.
Yeah, well, this also annoys me about people having less information about death or not having thought about it, is because sometimes then they do think there's a lot more time pressures than there actually are. Like, if you don't have the knowledge and the preparation, then you kind of are forced to make certain choices that you probably wouldn't make in retrospect. Like, if your person's dying in a hospice or a hospital, they're probably going to ask a funeral director to come and collect the body pretty quickly. But if you have that name of that funeral director and you've had a chat to them, you can kind of say to them, look, we're not really ready to have a funeral until a week or 2 weeks even, or we'd actually like to spend a few hours with our person in that hospital room. That's fine. Like, that's totally legal and totally fine and totally permissible. You can actually say to them, I'd like to bring that person home, right? And have them in the home, have them laid out in their bed and get people to come and visit them. Or I'd like to have a viewing with them in the funeral home. Like, the world of possibilities is opened up so much more when you have a little bit of knowledge about death. And I think there's Jessica Mitford, who's this kind of extraordinary journalist, one of the Mitford sisters in America. She wrote this book a long time ago called The American Way of Death, which was this kind of takedown of the American funeral industry. But she had this line which said that death is the ultimate impulse purchase. Like, funerals are the ultimate impulse purchase, because people just kind of like, oh crap, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just going to, I have no idea what I don't do. I'm just going to call somebody, right? I'm just going to go, yep, we'll just go with that coffin. Yep, we'll go with that funeral plan. And if you have knowledge, what knowledge gives you, what knowledge allows you to have is a bit more time. And it allows you to have more time to make more decisions. And then those decisions allow you to have more freedom and creativity. So that's why, it saddens me that so many people don't think about death earlier, because it then forces them to make, I think, less good decisions or options, or something they wouldn't have done if they had.
So funny to think about it like that, impulse purchase, that we have to make it quickly, and the pressure is, and it's the question that people ask once someone has passed is, well, when's the funeral? Because I need to organise my life so I can get there. So that pressure can come from a whole range of different areas.
Yeah, and I mean, you can have a funeral that's like really small and just a few people, and then have a big party later on. Like, you can do lots of different things. Nothing is right or wrong. No one's going to, I think no one's coming to tell you that you've done this wrong or right or enforce something. You can't get in trouble. I don't feel like sometimes that's important to emphasize.
That's so important. Yeah, you can't get in trouble. This is yours. You're not going to fail at this.
You're not going to fail at death. You're not going to fail at grief. Yeah.
Yeah. You've culminated a lot of this research and this conversation into a book, How to Die in the 21st Century. The book is out and available. What's some of the feedback that you're getting now that people are reading it and absorbing it?
It's really interesting. I mean, it's such a weird thing to see a book out in the world, out in the universe, and have people engage with it. And one of the nicest bits of feedback that I think I've got is people saying that it's funny, or that it's like it's a humorous book about death, which I think death is deeply funny. And I think that's something kind of, unless you've gone through a big death or a big grief, you might feel a bit uncomfortable saying. But if you have gone through a big death or a big grief, you'll know exactly what I mean. Because much of the dying process it's like Dadaism, surreal, existential funny. So I tried to write the book in the same way that I teach death and dying to young people, to students, which is with a lot of humour and with a lot of like warmth and compassion and kind of just recognition of the absurdity of what we're all doing here, which is like being mortal beings that know we're going to die, which is, I think, inherently hilarious. And so I've really loved people saying that it's funny. And then I've really loved people telling me the stories of them caring for their people in palliative care and at home and in hospice. And particularly when those stories are kind of about, I suppose, hard-fought battles or hard-won battles for them to do the things they want to do, right? Like, I want to tell you that we were able to get my dad to die at home if he wanted to, or, you know, we were allowed to have the dog. We smuggled the dog into the hospice. Yeah. Which you should always do.
Yeah.
You know, so all those kind of moments that have been really heartening to hear about. And to be honest with you, the number one best feedback I've got is from young people, because I think it's really interesting to learn that, like, Gen Z really do want to talk about death. And Gen Z people telling me that my book is cool is like really... I mean, that's all I want.
You've made it, Hannah. You've made it.
That's all I want in my life as a millennial was Gen Z to tell me that my book is cool. So that's probably been the best thing, actually.
What are they getting out of it from a generational conversation?
Yeah, so it's so weird. I mean, so the book in some ways is based on a course that I teach at the University of Melbourne, which is growing every year. We have like 230-something students in death. So we have over 300 across the university studying death. And I think the university was kind of quite concerned when I said that I was going to teach young people about death and dying. But they're extraordinarily good at thinking about mortality.
Yeah.
And they have these questions. I think it's a very 20-something-year-old thing to do, to think about your place in the world. And if you can think about your place in the world with this kind of mortality in the background, then I think it adds a layer of kind of depth or significance about those life choices. Because they're at the point in their life when they're about to make those choices about, like, what do I want my career to be? How do I want to spend my time? Who do I want to spend it with? And what a kind of great opportunity to think about death. Because it helps you make those choices, hopefully in a way that's a bit more consciously reflective of who you want to be and how you want to spend your time.
Of course, that power of what's the point of all? What's my role? How I'm going to step into life? What matters? What doesn't matter?
1,000%, yeah.
The humour is such an in to these conversations as well. And as you say, it's so inherent in some of those experiences. Anyone that has, pretty much everyone listening probably, I'm sure, has had an experience of losing someone that they've loved. And there's some of the moments that I hold on to. I remember when Dad passed away and we were talking to the funeral director and they said, oh, what would you like to have him wearing while he was in the coffin? And we were like,
oh my God, the clothing is so funny.
Clothing is hilarious. And we're like, oh, it doesn't really matter. It's not, it wasn't important to him, it was important to us. And so the funeral director said, oh, we'll just put him in a shroud. And my older brother just went, I can't cope with him being in a shroud.
I thought the clothing was the funniest because, like,
hilarious.
You know, it was like, well, what do you want him to like? And I'm like, because it's also like, well, if it goes in the coffin with him, then we're not going to get it. So it's like, it needs to be something he likes, but not something I want to inherit.
Yes.
Okay. And then, like, similarly, like my grandmother, they were like, oh, what do you want her to wear? La, la, la. And they were like, okay, what about her feet? And I was like, oh, I don't want her to be cold, so I suppose she's going to have socks. But she's dead. But, you know,
Yeah,
like,
she doesn't need the good shoes. She's not going for a
not
run.
the good shoes, but also, like, and I think there is just something deeply, like, absurdist comedy that arises from death that can be quite, like, cathartic, right? It can be kind of a nice, funny moment for the family to be like, Mike, what are we all doing?
Yeah, and that was not a question that I anticipated was going to come up, or how we're uniting, but just the look of my brother's face going, I cannot think about Dad in a shroud.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you want people to have a conversation starter and they don't want to talk about death, they're a woman, just ask them if they want to be buried in a bra. That'll...
Yeah. What you don't want to be buried in, that'll be good to know.
Yeah, what do you not want to wear?
Help us to cut it down. So much of this conversation where we've talked about death, dying, grief, has been a conversation about life, what matters, love, the perspective, investment in girlfriends, the friends, having people around us. The name of this podcast is Standout Life. What does that term mean to you? What does your philosophy on living in researching dying, what comes to the forefront?
I think it's mostly, I think what death has taught me in many ways is that all of the big moments that I thought were going to be the important parts of my life are really not that important. And it's all of the like small little moments of experiencing beauty and nature and love with other human beings that are what make up that standout life, right? That you think it's going to be your wedding day, or you think it's going to be like your big promotion, or you think it's going to, and all those things are really important, they might be, but like, have you ever bitten into a really good peach? Like, have you felt the sand between your toes and like the salt air on your face and the sunshine? And like, it's odd to think about death, but what I know is that at the end, what people often really reflect upon is sensory experience and a being in the world that appreciates beauty. And I really do think that like beauty is such an antidote to despair, especially when it comes to death and dying. And a standout life is not made of any single big achievement or a narrative or this kind of thing that gets written up in a newspaper and obituary. It's like tiny, 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 a constellation of tiny moments that are what matter to me. And that's quite fortunate because I can have those every day, right? That's something that you can bring into your life every day. And it's free. Doesn't require much effort to, in the famous words of Mary Oliver, right? It doesn't require much time or effort or money to observe life and think about it and tell other people about it. And that's quite fortunate.
That's beautiful, the string together the constellation of beauty in moments. Hannah, thank you for bringing your heart, your humour, bringing this book out into the world. I've loved this conversation. It's felt very life-affirming.
Oh, thank you so much. That's, at the end of the day, that's what a death chat should always be.
Thanks so much, Hannah.
Thank you.
Once again, thank you so much for tuning in. If you liked what you heard in today's episode, please don't forget to subscribe and also share this with someone who might also get value out of this episode. It's what helps us to continue to bring these incredible conversations. And if you want to be a better leader at work or in your business, then I want to tell you about pragmatic thinking. We help people just like you build stronger teams, healthier cultures, and true leadership confidence. We do it with a background in psychology and behavioural science combined with nearly 3 decades of proven experience. Thousands of incredible organisations trust us to level up their leaders, and potentially you will too. So please visit pragmaticthinking.com or check out the show notes below. Until next time, have a fantastic week.